state of prospects, top prospects in particular, and how they haven't performed well over the past couple of years. It's felt a little bit light up at the top recently. And look, these struggles, it goes beyond the majors too. I mean, some of these names are struggling in the minors as well. They're struggling, both when they get called up, before they get called up. And, it seems like there's kind of that shortage of elite talent, at least right now. And obviously some of these names could develop. Chris, do you have any reasoning or theories as to what's going on in baseball right now, why this might be happening with prospects?
So I think there are a couple of theories. I want to shout out Jeffrey Pastranostro, I think is his name, from Baseball Prospectus, who wrote a really good piece on this very topic and just kind of talked about how basically like the top 5 guys in their midseason top 50 update probably would have been more like top 15 guys in previous years. And I think the 2 explanations that I think make the most sense are, one, the COVID year. Just we're at a point where guys who were 16, 17, 18 in 2020 who didn't really get to play college baseball, didn't really get to play minor league baseball. A lot of them didn't get to play high school baseball if they were at that level, are now 20, 21, 22. And so we're just dealing with a whole generation of players who just lost a year of development. And I think that we're probably seeing the tail end of effects of that in a way that makes this a unique situation. I don't think 2029 will have a similar issue for example. But I think one other thing, and this is something I hadn't really thought about, but it was something in the minor league collective bargaining agreement. Organizations are limited to 165 players during the season. That's the total number of players that they can have on, I believe, just their minor league organization. That is total. That includes players on the IL. That includes players on restricted lists, whatever. That was 180 back in 2022. So this is the first year of that limit. So I think one thing we're probably seeing is just as a whole, the minors probably have fewer talented players. Now you would think that teams would get rid of their least talented players, and that's probably what happened. But there's a difference between like talent and projectability and current skill. And I think the likeliest explanation for what teams did is they got rid of a lot of those organizational filler types, those 29-year-old AAA starters who were never going to become major leaguers, but who had experience, had developed physically, knew what they were doing. And so I think just the level of play in the minors is probably lower than it's ever been. And so hitters and pitchers are playing against worse players at their levels relative to what they've faced in the past. The jump from A to AA is different than it's been in the past. The jump from AAA to the majors especially is probably much bigger than it's been in the past. And those 2 issues, the 2020 season and that, are working in tandem in that regard. So that's my working theory, is just the minor leagues as a whole are a worse place to develop baseball players right now. I'm hopeful that this is just a small term blip, but I think there are some structural issues. And then I think also just they are playing with different rules in the minors. AAA has this season, up until the All-Star break, I think they were using automated ball strikes during the week and the challenge system over the weekend, which is literally leaving them with different strike zones to play with in season.
It's crazy.
And then when they get called up, they have a completely different strike zone than the one they were like it. That is a major thing that I think is probably messing with guys' development and just their ability to adjust on the fly while getting the call. So I think those 3 things are the biggest ones, I would think so.
It shouldn't be a different strike zone though, right? They have to actually change the strike zone.
No, but the automatic strike zone, the automatic ball strikes particularly, is just like technically it's the same strike zone. They're supposed to call it the same, but we know that major league umpires have less consistent strike zones. And this was something that when they introduced automatic balls and strikes in the minors, what they tried was create it as it's written in the rule book, which is not that flat plane that you see on TV, but is a 3-dimensional box. And any part of the baseball going into any part of the box is a strike. And that is way different than how strike zones have ever really been called at the major league level. And so that led to really drastic changes when they first introduced it in walk rates and strikeout rates. Offense was way down when they first introduced it. So I think part of it is also just they keep futzing with the game at the minor league level in a way that I think makes sense. Like, you got to test this stuff somewhere, but
yeah,
it's probably having some impacts on development.
Sure. No, I mean, I think it's been beneficial to baseball overall, because a lot of the rule changes we've seen in recent years with the pickoff limits and
bigger bases.
All of that was tested in the minors first, and I'm sure they wouldn't have had the pitch clock. Gosh, that's the biggest change of all. And they've been resounding successes, but they wouldn't have had the confidence to implement in the majors, I doubt, if they hadn't tested it in the minors. So I don't know how much longer that'll go on. Clearly, baseball is going through a period of transition now. But yeah, it's clear something has gone wrong with development, and it's been frustrating in fantasy. It's not like this is the only stretch in baseball history where minor leaguers have had trouble adapting to the majors. That I think that's been more the rule than the exception, in fact, looking over all of baseball history. But we've gotten accustomed in fantasy to big prospects being big successes right away. And it's made our end of things difficult to manage. And we just have to adjust to it. We just have to adjust to not putting so many eggs in that basket, to treating them more like literal lottery tickets, in that they're probably not going to pay off. But if they do, then you have a nice big reward, and go from there. But I definitely feel, as somebody who just, like I said, I just put out my top 50, my midseason top 50. And it was hard to get enthusiastic about the guys at the top. Like, a lot of the ones that the consensus and the data all seem to agree, these are the most talented minor leaguers. They're just not performing. And so do you elevate the guys who are performing well, or do you stick with the guys who you think are the most talented? And for the most part, I stuck with the guys who I think are the most talented. That seems to be what all prospect rankers are doing. But, at some point we want to see actual production from Roman Anthony beyond just him dominating the skills showcase at the Futures game.
Yeah, I think this is it's obviously a huge talking point, and I've heard it discussed on other podcasts as well. And something you touched on, Chris, is, again, that jump from A ball to AA, and then from AAA to the major leagues. I mean, we heard, it was 5-6 years ago now at this point, maybe longer, when Keston Hiura got called up. He said it's like, this is the hardest it's ever been, right, to make the jump from AAA to the majors. And on top of that, like we're about to talk about, like, offense this year has been hard to come by. It's hard to hit, man. And some of these pitchers that are, like Paul Skeens and all this velocity and throwing up in the zone. And it seems like pitching has kind of had the edge, or, at least in terms of strikeouts, right? Strikeouts have been up massively over the past decade or so. So I also think it's just, we're in an era where going from AAA to major league pitching is just so incredibly hard. So I think that has kind of factored into it.
There's probably a lot of variables at play here. Like, anytime there's a foundational change like this, it's easy to speak with too much confidence about what the issue is, when probably there's so many variables we don't even know to think of. But yeah, the ones Chris is talking about, I think, are probably among the biggest.
And I just, like, to oversimplify, I think hitters don't I'm going to sound like an old fogey here, but, like, you don't face a pitcher until you get to the majors anymore. In like the pitching versus throwing dichotomy, like, to oversimplify, I think that's a lot of it. It's just like, the minors are younger. They're less experienced as a whole. And so you just don't have those, like, crafty journeymen sitting in the minors, working on their craft in the same way. It's much more development focused than competition focused, I think. And it makes me think that there was I can't remember, one of the like advanced stats reporter guys wrote something about there was a movement during the CBA to get rid of the minors entirely. I don't know if you guys remember this detail, but someone was like, we should just get rid of minor league baseball being affiliated with Major League Baseball and just have everyone have development systems like they have in, Venezuela and the Dominican Republic. And watching what's happening right now, that was so obviously a horrible, horrible idea that was just designed to save money. And I'm so glad that nobody took it seriously. But I worry that that's what some teams still want to do. And it's just nothing can replace competitive games for developing players.
Well, part of the reason I don't think this is going to be a long-standing issue is because they recognize it's a problem as much as anybody. There's so much incentive at this level to not miss, to not have any sort of inefficiency in the development process. And if it's not going well, teams are going to figure out ways to set up their structure their minor league team so that it does go better, whether that does mean bringing in some of those 29-year-olds you were talking about just to help build these players up or something else entirely that we're not seeing here.
I agree with that.
Last question regarding prospects. And Scott, you kind of touched on, treating prospects as lottery tickets. And I think a lot of times we talk about that from a redraft perspective. Is that also your approach in keeper and dynasty leagues as well? Because we all play in the same dynasty league together, the Scott White Dynasty League. And I have noticed that you have been more open to trading your prospects away than maybe you were 5 or 10 years ago. So has this changed the way that you are approaching prospects in dynasty as well?
Yeah, exactly that. I've been saying when we've had the dynasty conversation the last few years, I've been saying I'm always playing for next year. And, that a lot of that means continually stockpiling prospects, but I'm less confident those prospects are going to pay off now. And you could just end up wasting so much time and resources pursuing them, particularly when the economics in that particular dynasty league are what they are, where people cling to those prospects because they're kept for a low dollar amount and they'll pay off for years to come. Well, if they're not necessarily going to pay off for years to come, then maybe we shouldn't cling to them so tightly. And so I've kind of adjusted my calibration there in trades. I just traded, I just included Roman Anthony in a trade with Chris, actually, a few weeks ago. And in part for that reason, Chris is out of it. It made sense why he'd want a prospect like that. But the players I got back aren't like long-term pieces. I may keep a couple of them next year, but probably not beyond that. So it was really not the sort of trade I'm accustomed to making in that league, particularly with giving up a prospect as high end as Anthony. And there were other considerations there that are specific to this dynasty league and not to the general discussion here. But broadly speaking, I even though Roman Anthony, I think, is a top 15 prospect, I'm not sure how long it's going to take him to be good when he does reach the majors.
Yeah.
And most of these dynasty leagues are set up so that they have to be good quickly to have been worth the wait.